Hi, welcome to the Bite Size Learning with Arts Access North Carolina. My name is Max, and today we are joined by local poet Kat Milberger, who is a member of the Artist Link Project. Kat has just launched her self-bound book of poems titled Star Signals, and will be talking to us today about poetry and emotions in the body. Welcome, Kat.
So today I wanted to talk to everyone about poetry and the body. So poetry, it's National Poetry Month, and poetry is really near and dear to my heart. I am a disabled therapist and poet, and I'm also really passionate about experiencing life in an embodied way, and that comes from kind of my therapy background. So I'll talk more about that. But before we start, just to kind of set the tone, I wanted to read a poem. And this poem is by Laura Hershey, and it's called Reading to the Cooks. And I'm just going to read it to you all, and I want you to just feel, let the poem wash over you, and just notice what you feel in your body as you listen or as you read. We read poems to you in the kitchen, amid bright chunks of peach and plum, while you deftly handle honed knives, thick onion slices. I struggle with a descriptor. I mix too many adjectives with my nouns, while you blend in just the right measure of tomatoes and cayenne. You hear me try out my second half-baked rewrite as I watch you knead the dough that will become bread. You feed us so well because it matters, because nourished bodies birth sounder poems. You work so calmly and listen so thoroughly, as if preparing a meal for 80 were a simple task, requiring only half your attention. You listen and cook and listen. You smile and say, at the lines you like, as if you had just tasted something delicious. So I like to just take a second and notice what you feel in your body, what energy this poem brings up for you, and just be with that for a moment. So one of the reasons why poetry is so beautiful is that it's so accessible. It is an old art form, and it predates literacy. So it can be oral, it can be in writing or in ASL. And, there's lots of contemporary ways of expressing poetry, including music, rap, rhyming. I recently saw, I went to a webinar, and this poet, Ellen Samuels, I'm holding a book here called Hypermobilities. And Ellen Samuels has the same disability that I have, which is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And this book is all haikus that she wrote during her many health-related procedures, experiences with hospitals and doctors. And she was able to write them because she was keeping them in her mind, because they were just haikus. So they were the 5-7-5 syllables. And so she wrote them as she was experiencing these things in her mind. And it just kind of speaks to how accessible poetry is. And you can kind of formulate poems anywhere, in any way. And I just wanted to read one of the poems here. It's called Subluxation Shoulder. The smallest pop, unstopped, what you knew and forgot in this knife joint caught. It's a beautiful little poem. I really like this book. And there's a quote from Jennifer Bartlett, who is another poet with disabilities. And she says, "A poem doesn't need to follow any particular grammar rules. It is the record of one's own experience of the singular mind and/or body, a singular voice. For many of us, it is also a way of being in the world, a world that in many ways was not made for us and actively resists our participation. Through poetry, we are able to remake and reinvent the world. So me personally, I call myself a poet, but I really have not been formally trained in writing poetry. I started writing in 2017 as really just a form of therapy for myself. So it was kind of, a feeling would come up and I would write, and then I realized, wow, I'm actually writing poetry. That's what I'm doing right here. So since 2017, I've been writing on my own for my own therapy, and then I really wanted to do something with some of this therapy. So I got funding from North Carolina Arts Council to self-publish and self-bind this book of poems called Star Signals. And there's a picture here of this book, and it's open to a page, and there's a photograph on one side of the page. And my book of poems does have photography that are connected to each poem. And my little sister, Sarah Milberger, is the photographer there. So if you are interested in checking that out, I have an Etsy store at catdustcreations.etsy.com. And I really would love to be able to share my poetry with as many people as are interested. So I wanted to talk more about the body. I think a lot of us as young people, especially those of us that might have mixed relationships with our bodies for various reasons, we learn to kind of detach from our body or not really fully observe the sensations that are present in the body. And I personally my body was like my tool. I just needed my body to do what I needed to do, and I just wanted to push it, command it. It was like a dictatorship type situation. And I really learned over time with all of the things I experienced through my disability and just in general that, I needed to create more of a partnership with my body. And the body is the place that holds all of our life experiences, all of our traumas, all of our relationships, all of the joys that we experience in our life. And we're just processing our environment all the time, endlessly. And as a therapist, I do a lot of I'm really drawn to body-based therapies. So I do a lot of sensory motor or somatic-based therapies. And I do EMDR, which some of you may know about. It's a trauma-based therapy that involves eye movements and really just noticing what our bodies feel when we think about traumatic or difficult experiences. It allows our bodies to fully process the things that we didn't process when we experienced the original traumas. And this is something I think is very particularly relevant to anyone that experiences any sort of medical trauma or disability-related grief as well. So one thing I'm really passionate about is this idea that emotions are not irrational. I think there's this false idea that you have your rational thoughts and then you have your emotions, and your emotions are irrational or illogical. And that's just not true, because emotions serve a very clear purpose. We have emotions for very clear reasons. For example, anger is an emotion that primes us to assert ourselves and to advocate for ourselves. Joy primes us to reach out for things, to learn, to engage with the environment. And fear is a survival-based emotion that keeps us safe. It keeps us from experiencing danger or things that will threaten us. So emotions are incredibly useful and incredibly rational. And that's something that I really think is important to acknowledge as we become more connected to our emotions and to our bodies, is to, instead of pushing them away and thinking, oh, this is irrational, I shouldn't be feeling this way, is to just recognize that there's a reason I'm feeling this way. This is there's an image here that there's a bunch of there's a bunch of figures, and the figures have colors in their bodies. So there's yellow, red, and blue in different parts of the body. And for each figure, there's an emotion listed: anger, fear, disgust, happiness, sadness, surprise, neutral, anxiety, love, depression, contempt, pride, shame, envy. And all of these images represent a study that was done by Lori Numemma, who studied emotions as they were expressed in the body. And there were participants from Finland, Sweden, and Taiwan. So this was a cross-cultural study. And essentially, they developed this theory that we experience sensations and emotions similarly across cultures, and that there's kind of a map of the way that people experience emotions in the body. So there's a logic to it, and there's a way to kind of map it out. And this seems obvious, right? Because when we're happy, we know we're happy. But why are we happy? Oh, it's because we feel these cluster of sensations that are that tend to show up when we're happy. So just to give you an idea here, if you look at the depression figure here, there's a bunch of blue, light and dark blue, and the blue in this image represents a lack of sensation or a numbness. So depression comes with this numb feeling or this lack of sensation throughout the body. Whereas if you look at the sensation of love, it is a bright yellow in the chest and a lot in the kind of center of the body. And that is, the yellow is the intensity of a sensation. So yellow means that you feel a lot of sensation in the chest, in the center of the body. Yeah. I think it's really natural to avoid emotions, to avoid sensations, pain, especially painful or uncomfortable sensations, because a lot of emotions are uncomfortable or painful. And so there's a lot of avoidance of that, which is definitely an evolutionary response. Like, we all avoid pain because it's useful to us, it's important to us, right? If we touch a hot oven and it hurts, we're gonna, stop touching it because it's, painful. However, we are now in an age where our bodies can't really determine what is a true threat versus what is a perceived threat. So for example, if I am in a group of people and someone gives me an eye roll or a different look, it might feel to me like I'm in physical danger when really it's a social danger, right? I'm afraid of losing connection to this social group. But in my body, it's experienced very similarly to if I were to be in physical danger, like if there's a tiger coming after me. So I think, it's important for us to recognize when we do need to avoid the discomfort or the distress, and when it's actually unnecessary, when we actually just need to feel whatever it is that we're feeling. So emotion tends to come in waves, and then it changes naturally. It doesn't ever stay the same. A lot of people are afraid, but if I feel this sadness, then I'll be stuck here forever. If I let myself cry, then I'll cry forever. And that's a fear that's really common and really natural. But generally speaking, emotions are always moving and always changing. And the more we notice them and observe them in a non-judgmental and curious way, the more they will give rise to new emotions. So just to give you an example from EMDR, let's say I'm working with a client who is experiencing grief related to their disability. They might start in a place of anger, and we'll do the eye movements, and I'll just say, observe that anger. They'll notice certain feelings in their bodies. And then as the anger moves and changes, it might intensify, but then afterwards it starts to feel like sadness and despair. And there's tears that come down, and the client will be crying. And then after a few more sets of eye movements, they'll realize, wow, I really have so many people in my life that have helped me. And they'll feel this sense of gratitude and this swelling in the body and this fullness in the body. And I'm honestly just feeling a little bit of it myself, just thinking about it, because it's powerful. And so there's this natural change and flow. But if we try to avoid emotions altogether or avoid sensations, then we're never able to ride this wave, and that gives way to more joyful emotions or more connective emotions. It's a skill. So the reason why I bring this up with relation to poetry is that poetry is a very useful way to process these waves of emotion. Art, music, body movement, poetry are all, ways that people have been processing emotions for a long time, and disabled artists and poets, this is a way to channel the emotional experience. So obviously there's many different ways to channel it: therapy, if you have any spiritual practices, or being able to connect to nature, or being able to connect to loved ones. So yeah, lots of ways to ride the waves of emotional experience. This is one of my poems. It is not in my book of poems, so y'all can be the first ones to hear this one. But this is called Feel It, and it's really about this concept that I'm describing. There's no need to solve it. The detective can stand down. Feel it. That's it. Love follows. Rest assured, love follows. You are no exception to the rule. And yeah, that the you are no exception to the rule to me means that when I'm afraid that there's something wrong with me, or that I'm going to be sad forever, right? That I remember that that's not how it works, and that all I need to do is feel it, and it's a really powerful realization to have. So yeah, my poetry process involves a lot of building awareness of what I'm feeling on a daily basis. So I do a daily meditation practice where about 25 minutes a day, I sit and I breathe, and sometimes I listen to guided meditations, other times I just do a silent meditation. And I'm trying to essentially become more in tune with whatever I'm noticing in my body and in my emotions. And with poetry, really, it's all about recognizing a moment of potential energy. So sometimes that like potential energy that kind of needs to be channeled, right? It's being able to recognize when that comes up in my day-to-day life. So sometimes it's in the morning, sometimes it's right after work, sometimes it's when I'm interacting with a friend, and just being able to recognize it. And for me, that feels like a tightness in the chest or throat, or maybe it's a bunch of negative cycling thoughts that I'm just kind of stuck on something, and it's cycling and cycling. Or maybe there's like a feeling of a frustration, or like searching for something, I'm longing for something. So those types of potential energy moments in my daily life. And then when I recognize it and I can get to a place where I can write, I'll just kind of write whatever it is that I'm feeling. I just let my feelings flow. This is a poem that I wrote so I have postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And this is a poem I wrote when I was dealing with kind of a worsening of my POTS symptoms. So this was a moment that I really just let that process happen. I let that emotion flow. And it's called Forever Learning. I can still put pen to page. That's something. Things have been different, have been sluggish and slow, have been unable to answer the question, how are you? Mind over matter, a motto I once ascribed to. I've been recently trying to determine where free will meets chance. It's not a new question, but it is refreshed by the bricks that weigh me down in the room that spins when I try to walk. Medications, supplements, exercise, sleep. When the status quo might not know how to keep me vertical, what's worse? To live slower, to hurt, or to search, fueled by the anxious energy of imagined science the real science hasn't caught up with yet. I don't get another life. I don't get another body. I am not powerless, and I am not God. I refuse to be caught in a web of my own suffering. I will learn how to learn to live. So there are so many really talented disabled poets out there. I'm not going to read this list out, but I would encourage people to really look into some of these poets. Some of them are really well established and famous poets, and some of them are more contemporary or emerging poets. But this is a list that I compiled just based on you know, some of the poets that I like and some of the people that I've heard of and some of my close friends recommendations for disabled poets to check out. And I wanted to read some poetry from some other disabled poets. So I'm going to share my screen to share an excerpt from Kamisha Jones. It's called Praise Song for the Body.
Praise song for the body. Praise for the body that takes pain and names it survival, that drinks anguish without ruling it bitter, contains the daggers of sickness and bends them into a good home, a shelter, an escape route. Call this body miracle. Call it sanctuary. Name its ghost, but refuse to believe it is haunted. Refuse to give up on hope and all of its helium, its elevating power to raise this weighted vessel into a thing of light.
So I also wanted to share a poem by Andrea Gibson, who is a poet who has dealt with chronic illness throughout their life. And the poem, just going to read an excerpt, so I'm not going to read the entire poem, but it's called The Year of No Grudges, or instead of writing a furious text, I try a poem. I know most people try hard to do good and find out too late that they should have tried softer. I've never in my whole life been level-headed, but the older I get, I'm more level-hearted. And I think we make gods who look like us for a reason. I think, in spite of it all, we trust we can be believed in. When I don't believe in myself, I try to remember I have walked on water like 700 times in Maine in the dead of winter. Where I come from, you can drive a pickup truck from one side of the lake to the other, and people have an unusually high quantity of missing teeth and fingers, but you can still count on them to buy whitening strips and wedding rings, because where I come from, beauty is in the eye of anyone who sees what's missing, but can't stop pointing to what's still there. If there's no definition of for love yet, I think that's a good one. So I think, you know, I want to leave folks with something to try, because I think that this is an accessible thing for anyone to write a poem if you've never written poetry before, or just to experience what emotions can feel like in the body and transform that into some sort of words. So this is a little exercise that I'd love for people to try when they get a chance. And essentially, you just want to, when you notice yourself feeling a strong emotion or sensation, just take a moment to pause. Take a few moments to breathe in and notice whatever it is that you're feeling in your body with curiosity. So you might have words to describe it, such as shame, fear, doubt, or longing. Or maybe you'll have words that are more describing of the sensations, like expanding, tightness, twisting, tingling, heat. And just take a second with that feeling and just start putting words to the feeling. And if you can, try to find a metaphor to describe what you're feeling. So it might feel like a flower blooming in springtime, or a ship on stormy seas, or the feeling when you drop your cell phone in the toilet again. So it's basically a way to put words to whatever it is you're observing. After that exercise, notice if just putting words to it or finding some sort of metaphor for that feeling actually changes the feeling. Not trying to make it go away, but just noticing how it shifts. It might become more intense, it might recede, it might spread out in the body. There might be more clarity to the feeling. So that's the exercise, and I would encourage you to try that whenever you want. So there's so much poetry out there, so much, and there's a lot of poetry by disabled artists and poets. So this is a list that I compiled of places to explore poetry, and many of these are specific to disabled poets. So I would encourage you to read these, to go to these sites to explore what's out there, and just to plug in and see what you connect to. Yeah, so that's all for that segment. This is a picture of me with my book, Star Signals. You can see on the front and back cover, there's an image of a figure sitting cross-legged. It is me, so it's an androgynous looking white person in a green top, and there's a little ethereal yellow light around the head of the person. And this image was created by a friend of mine, Sid Radkowitz, who is an artist and does beautiful art. So that's the image on the cover of my book. I also want to make it to say as well that I have a digital version of the book that is screen reader compatible. So that's also on my Etsy page at catdustcreations.etsy.com.
Thank you, Kat. Now we are going to have a short Q&A with some questions we received from social media. And I know some of these, I think you pretty much went over in your slides, but we'll just kind of reiterate some of them. The first one is, I would love to hear a little on how you started the journey of self-publishing your poetry.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Honestly, the first part was just deciding that I wanted to do it, which in itself was a whole process, in that, you know, it's very personal to share your therapeutic poetry with other people. But I've always wanted to share some of my poetry, so I felt like it would be a good way to honor what I've written and all the things that I've put into it. So the first thing was deciding, and then after I decided I wanted to do it, I started reading through my books of my poetry and trying to choose the poems that would go well together. And then once I did that, I started reaching out to the people in my life that I trusted to kind of look through, to read, to give me feedback. And then I actually did I went to the Artists with Disabilities group and showed some of my poetry in that group, which really helped build my confidence to be able to share it to a wider audience. And everyone in that group was so encouraging, and I got a lot of really good feedback. So the next thing I did was figuring out how I was going to create a digital version of this. And I am lucky enough to have a sister who is a designer. So she has InDesign, and she helped me use InDesign to format the book of poems. And then that's when I applied for a grant through the Durham Arts Council. And that process, I got the grant, and then I was able to actually print. I also had a friend, Chloe Crawford, who was able to help me with the PDF to put the screen reader compatibility in, and to be able to have the alt text there and the image descriptions for everyone. So that was my process. And I think once I got it printed, then the process was just me binding. It was me actually like bookbinding, which was a really fun thing for me to learn how to do, and has been really enjoyable for me to do. And it also feels really personal to be able to touch every single book that I publish and give to people. So.
And that's perfect because the next one, I think goes into that. Do you feel that choosing to hand bind your poetry book adds to the connection between your body and your emotions?
What a great question. Absolutely. And I made sure to take some time with the first few books that I bound to just like really feel what that felt like, because it did feel really, I cried, like I cry a lot, but I cried because it was really beautiful to see my work displayed in a way that was like, beautifully done. And I have a lot of people to thank for that. But yeah, and the actual act of binding it allows me, because I know I get the orders in and I'm actually binding the book for a specific person. Like I know who the person is that I'm binding it for. Even if I don't know them personally, I know their name. And so I can just like think about that person as I'm binding it, which I think, I don't know, there's something cool about that, to be able to do that. And also bookbinding is not great for my body in general, because I have issues with my fingers and my neck. But I think that makes it so I have to be really engaged in the process. I have to be really listening to my body through the process and stopping when I need to stop, and taking whatever measures I need to protect my body from repetitive use damage. So yeah.
Good. Awesome. This next one is kind of a multiple part question. So I guess I'll read the whole thing, and then if I need to, I can go back and read the individual parts.
Cool.
What setting do you prefer when you write poetry? Do you listen to music, like to be in nature, etc.? How does your immediate environment influence your poetry?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. So I would say that's kind of an all of the above. I would say the place I write poetry most is like on my bed, because I think a lot of times I feel safe there and I feel safe to express my emotions. But I've also done different, in my book, there's 2 poems entitled Silent Retreat 1 and 2. And I did those poems while I was on a silent retreat, which I did a couple of years ago. And yes, the nature really does inspire me a lot. So being in nature, a lot of times I feel that impetus to write. And so I have written a lot of poems when I'm sitting outside in nature, experiencing a beautiful, piece of nature. I remember specifically, I was sitting at a lake, and it was kind of the sun was setting, and there was this gray, the gray of the water of the lake was kind of merging with the gray of the sky. And that was really inspirational to me. And I was able to write a few really lovely poems that was inspired by that nature. And music definitely, like sometimes I'll listen to a song and I will hear it and it will resonate so much, I'll listen to it like 6 times in a row as I'm writing, which is really cool. So I think, yeah, the answer to that question is just all of the above. Yes.
Okay, awesome. And our last question here, which is also a 2-parter. Do you find yourself writing spontaneously, or do you set aside time specifically to write?
Yeah, so for me, it is really important to not push myself. That's like my personal, I can be a little rigid in general. Like I like routines, I'm very routine oriented. But I don't want to ever feel pressure to write. I know that a lot of people do like morning pages and things like that. And I think that's really great and that works for people. And I might be in a place in my life at some point where I want to do something like that. But right now in my life, it's really important for me not to push myself or pressure myself to write. So I just think about it as something that I do when I feel the kind of energy to do it. because it really is something I want to have as just a therapeutic approach for me. And yeah, I don't write as a full-time job. That's part of it, I think. It's more of a kind of a therapeutic and artistic hobby for me. But I find that, yeah, I write when I feel the energy to write, when I feel that that feeling of wanting to write versus doing it like on a regular basis or on a scheduled basis. But I think you just have to find what works for you. I think everyone has a different way that they make it happen.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us today and for this wonderful presentation. We were so grateful to have you. And we look forward to continuing to see any more books you might publish. Please let us know.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.